Thanks for joining us, everyone. Look, between deepfakes, AI agents, and a wave of social engineering attacks, proving your identity is becoming one of the most important and hardest problems to solve in crypto. Because it's complicated, right? You know, we want assurance that we know who or what we're interacting with, but at the same time, we don't want to have to give up our privacy. So how do we prove humanness without creating a surveillance state? And what I love about this panel is we've got three people who are approaching this problem from very different angles, which I think reflects reality. You know, there probably isn't a single silver bullet here. We're going to be looking at a spectrum of solutions across cryptographic, social, behavioral, reputational, and even cultural. So to kick us off, and I guess just to ground this conversation, and to make sure that we're all on the same page, I thought we could actually just explain what we mean when we talk about proving that we're human or you're human online today, and what does proof of humanity actually mean to you? I know that's a big question, but you guys must be talking about this a lot. Do you want to kick us off, Daniela?
Sure. So I'm Daniela Barbosa. I'm the executive director at the Linux Foundation for LF Decentralized Trust, which is an umbrella
Linux,
of open source projects, standards, and specs.
Remember Raspberry Pi? I told you.
Decentralized identity, interoperability, cryptography, and many other categories of what we call decentralized technologies, which really touch a lot of what we're going to be talking today, which is identity and proving not only who you are as a human, like I'm a human, I'm online, but also solving trust. You know, how do you trust, whether that is an agent or a human? How do you build trust into the models? Accountability. So what happens when either the individual or their agent or something else goes, rogue for a while? And how do you really do that with privacy-preserving methods? Meaning that I am not displaying, all sorts of private information, PMI, but I'm really only verifying the pieces. So I'm proving that I'm human, I'm proving that I can be trusted, I'm proving that what I'm doing has accountability, so proof of authority essentially to do that, and then I'm also proving, or I have the benefits of privacy as part of that.
Andrew, Nick, would you like to add to that?
Sure. Andrew Hughes, VP of Global Standards at FaceTech. FaceTech is a face biometrics company that can detect the difference between a real person, human being, and any kind of fake on the other side of the camera. So we don't get into the can you trust the person as an individual. We just prove that it's a human being. And then our customers take it from that point. So the title of this panel speaks about humanity and the identification data that we all know and love. But we have a very, very tiny piece of proof of human being so that the trust process can extend from there. We give you that human root of trust to complement the digital and cryptographic root of trust from private keys and PKI and blockchains.
Hi, Nicolas is one of the two founders of Pi Network, which is a layer 1 blockchain protocol. And it has the special property that every single account on the blockchain is already KYC. So I think to answer your question, I also want to step back a little bit and say that it depends on the purpose. So in some cases, you need to know who exactly the person is. Like if someone goes to the bank and wants to withdraw money, you really need to know who exactly the person is. In other cases, you need to know whether what's the act of that is being conducted, whether it's happening by a human or a bot.
Yeah.
And in other cases, you want to know whether there are unique people behind a situation. So, like for example, if you had ratings on an online system, you don't want to allocate 1,000 ratings, 1,000 different product reviews to one act who created 1,000 bots. You want to give more fairness, everyone's voice.
Just one more question, I guess, on foundational. The second part of this title is not doxing yourself. When we talk about that, are we saying, I doubt it's that people necessarily need to be completely anon on the internet, or is it more kind of about wanting personal control over your data, having the option of selective disclosure? You know, how do you draw that line in terms of what is not doxing yourself?
So I'll start. So I'm assuming everyone's gone through the ceremony of taking a picture of your driver's license front and back, taking a selfie, and you get the green check mark. You're the person represented by the document.
Many times.
That's
yep.
great. Where does the data go? So now whoever it was doing that KYC process, ID verification process, has a copy of that data. There are no rules that are universal for how long they should keep those images of your identification data, and the fact that that face and that timestamp and that context existed, happened. A recent case where many French people were doxxed accidentally. The France ministry that deals with digital identity and issuance of credentials was hacked, and there was a database breach. And of course, all the audit images that they were required to keep for some period of time, they were just stolen. So that's, to me, what the doxing part is you go through a process to gain trustworthiness in the system without any direct knowledge of what happens to the data afterwards. And if it's not protected properly or expunged quickly, that's the doxing problem.
Yeah, I will echo that. And I want to say that when people are thinking of not doxing your identity, especially in a crypto conference, their mind immediately goes into ZK proofs, such as advanced techniques like ZK Starks, and bulletproofs and things like that. But even though these techniques are a little more advanced, you need to mathematically convert your problem into a formula and then polynomial computations and other things. But in practice, you can have zero knowledge with existing primitives we all know and understand. Let me give you a very quick example. So imagine in the traditional world, you want to buy alcohol, so you go to the store. What you do is you give your driving license, and you're essentially showing all of your data for no reason, because all they need to know is whether you're above 21 or not. And instead they're getting your home address, your date of birth, everything. Now, if you were to do this in a zero knowledge way, you could actually have a KYC authority, let's say the Pi KYC authority. And that authority can provide you a statement, you are more than 21, about 21 years old, and give you the cryptographic signature of that statement, together with for example, your Face ID data. And then all you need to do is you need to provide that statement, and the recipient can check whether the signature is coming from the trusted third party in this case. And you've already proven that you are above 21 without delivering more information that's necessary.
And just to quickly follow on to that, I forgot to say I work on international standards at the ISO level, and specifically the mobile driver's license, the one that you can use at some TSA checkpoints at airports, the same one. We've built that in to that credential format. So we have, over 21 flags, and that's all you have to send. We're building in Longfellow ZK for future use, because that's the next revision. So the kinds of credentials being issued by state DMVs and governments, they're very well aware of these issues, and they're taking measures with the technologies available to prevent that oversharing of data.
And I think, when it comes to digital driver's license, etc., right, that's a whole industry that's focused on that one thing. If you start thinking about apps and other types of, applications online, internet, that the technology is there, the standards are there. There might be multiple standards, and there might be a lot of arguments about which standard is best. And the regulations, regulators across the world, depending on the jurisdiction, have different opinion. And a lot of the jurisdictional regulations inform with the technology that can only be deployed in those regions as well. But ultimately, what we're seeing because of the fast pace of application development, and is people are not building identity into the core architecture.
Yeah.
What they're doing is they're bolting it on at the end. Oh, this is a, oh, well, yeah, that's right. We have to deal with identity. So the techniques, the ZKPs and other privacy-preserving techniques, technologies are there. There's really wonderful implementations around the world that you can take a look at. But yet people, whether they're in financial services or they're in, client app building, and obviously in the agentic world, are just not putting identity at the architecture from the start. And that, I think, is the biggest problem that, it's just running away from us.
I guess just as a follow-up question to that, we've got a wealth of knowledge here in terms of digital identity, and I think there's decades of work that's been done on digital identity. Something that came up in our prep call, if I may say, was a hint of frustration that whenever a new emerging tech comes out, whether it's crypto, whether it's AI, it feels like we're reinventing the wheel and starting from scratch on identity. So why is that, and how are you putting these people back in their place?
So it's the problem of non-universal knowledge about every possible thing. So several years ago, sort of 2016, 2017, the emerging blockchain as a real thing community started trying to deploy things, trying to standardize. And they came up with the great idea of having identity on the blockchain. Until they met some digital identity pros that have been around for a while, who pointed out that putting identifying information on the blockchain that is immutable and correlatable in certain ways back to government issued ID was counter to the principles of non-censorship and independence from authorities. They quickly realized that there was an existing industry, and were able to quickly shift focus and learn about the techniques and the existing industry of digital identity, enterprise identity, because we were challenged about our assumptions. We shifted as well, and the decentralized identity world sort of came out of that collision of galaxies.
Wow.
Which is, that's what always happens, right? So the challengers come in, they realize that there's something already existing, and the worlds collide and find a way forward because neither is going away.
Yeah.
I think in practical terms, it makes more sense to store attestation or logs of whether something happened or not on blockchain rather than the actual KYC.
And that's the approaches that they're taking.
Yes, yes. So because in some cases for regulation, you need to prove that you actually check the ID of someone. So you can have that attestation, store it on blockchain, make it publicly accessible anytime, but not the actual ID.
Right. Yeah, and it's the same today with agentic AI. And we're seeing the same push and pull. But I do think a lot of the lessons learned over the last 10 years in this space, because it's a lot of the same people on both sides, are really just helping accelerate the technology, the standards, and this, being looked at as actual operational, building it into the core. So at the Linux Foundation for the last 10 years, we've had groups of organizations and individuals working on identity. We've had, identity-related blockchain projects. We have Trust over IP, where all the trust governance frameworks are being worked on, the community specs. Just in September, a new working group was launched that was called the Decentralized Trust Working Group, Trust Graph Working Group, to specifically work on agentic AI identity opportunities and problems to do so. But I think it's like this, regardless of what other industry. If you back up like 30 years between our, or 20 years before our passports had chips in them, right? That was also something that the industry had to coincide with folks working on identity. You were there.
I was there, and it only took 10 years for the U.S. border people to actually start checking the chips. But that's not possible.
Wow.
But there's actually another aspect as well, which is kind of like forcing the industry to reinvent the wheel in a justified way, which is the whole agentic AI. So before that, it was very easy to make assumptions between who is a bot and who is a human, because humans had very different behavior. compared to bots. Therefore, you had systems like CAPTCHA and other things that you could safely, more or less, assume that only a human could answer and proceed certain checks. But now, with agents becoming more and more human-like, and the fact that an agent can be replicated to a million agents concurrently running, it creates new challenges for identity that we need to see as a community. So, especially, that was also one of our core principles why we started having fundamental identity KYC verification on the Pi blockchain, because each individual, for example, can have their own primary identity and can run multiple agents if they want. But if the agents are carrying their identity and they are essentially attributing to the original user the behavior, then that's some realistic, good case scenario. The bad case is when the agents are pretending to be humans themselves. But that's why the society needs to add some kinds of checks and balances for this problem in the future.
So, sorry, I'm taking a tangent here.
Go for it.
I think it's interesting, so you must think it's interesting. What was the original proof of human test? So today we're talking biometrics, attestations on a chain. That didn't exist in the 70s, mainframes, right? So how did you prove you were a human? Password. Password is actually proof of human. Once passwords became not useful anymore very quickly, what was the next proof of human? Well, your physical, what do they call it? I can't remember the name. The token cards with the changing numbers. There's some people that are old enough to have had several of these.
2FAs.
RSA 2FAs, yeah. So 2FAs. So first it was knowledge-based. That's how you prove you're human, because only people can remember things, right?
Yeah.
Secrets. Then it was what you have, physical token. Until everyone realized that everyone loses physical tokens, and synchronization and batteries and all that stuff. So now, my opinion, working for a biometrics company, obviously, the way you prove you're a human is through biometrics and liveness.
Until the fake comes in.
No. This is the answer.
Well, let's go deeper into this, because I think each of you have very interesting use cases to share in terms of how
Get
you're
'em,
actually
Dr.
doing
Nick.
this. It's a deceptively simple question, right? Like at the core of this, we're just trying to figure out how do you reliably link a real human to a digital identity or a cryptographic key without exposing massive security or privacy issues. So, let's go through each of you, because I think you're all working on it in very, very different ways. Daniela, the Linux Foundation has been working on identity and trust infra for years and years. Maybe you want to walk us through the kernel maintainer example, and specifically why it matters even beyond open source.
Sure. And we're here at Consensus, so the conversation around hacks, and there was a couple months back, there was a social engineering hack, which actually was a team of individuals that would go from conference to conference.
Going to events like this.
They got embedded in a community. They started doing small contributions into the code base. They eventually got more trust in that. So it was complete social engineering. It took them months and months and months to do. And we've seen even bigger ones of that as well. So a couple of years ago in the Linux kernel, the same thing. Someone that impersonating a maintainer or a contributor got to put some code into the kernel that, thank goodness, the kernel maintainers noticed and stopped before it went through. But again, I think it was a 3-year process that social engineering process was going through. So how do you do proof of humanhood for maintainers? So for those who don't know, the Linux kernel, I would say the most important open source project in the world, but there's thousands of maintainers around the world that are continuously contributing to the kernel. And thousands more, just contributing, and there's thousands of maintainers. So how do you make sure that the maintainers, who the maintainers are, right? So today, and for many, many years, there's been a physical key signing ceremony, where you meet with other maintainers. You essentially pull out your passport, you say, "Hey Andrew, I'm Daniela." Nice
Actually,
to meet you."
IRL. Yeah, okay.
And he vouches for me, and he's already been vouched by 3 others, and it creates a root of trust, right? It is not scalable in today's digital world, even with the kernel itself that has thousands of maintainers, but it's certainly not scalable in the DeFi crypto development world at all. So what we've been working on is using these techniques that we've been talking about with verifiable credentials, is how do we create a digital way to trust so the maintainers can prove to them, prove to each other who they are, and then that essentially verified credential is carried with them when they do commits. And I think this is going to be in September. We'll have a working prototype, and by then we'll be talking to other major open source programs that really need to understand who their maintainers are for security's sake. But also even for regulatory requirements' sake, who actually contributed to a code project as well. So a lot of this work is taking the 10 years of knowledge that our community has had and solving real problems in the digital world around how human beings have proof of authority to do the thing that they're going to do.
Andrew, you're on biometrics, as you mentioned. I'm keen to know how you see, how do you see liveness detection evolving when we're sort of seeing this proliferation of AI-generated identities online?
So one of the evolutions of digital identity and digital credentials has been a shift towards using multiple signals across multiple sources to establish identification and digital credentials, digital identity. So plugging into what Daniela said, we're getting engaged in the first-person credential project, which is what the Linux maintainers are moving towards. And we're actually adding the signal that it's a person to the other signals and combining them into verifiable credentials. So instead of doing a monolithic, using a big bureau to do a KYC, and then you've got this static identification of a person that lasts forever, the world is moving down to signals, risk context, and basically verification at important times and moving closer to continuous verification. So yeah, that's sort of where we fit into this picture, because face biometrics specifically, you need a device with a camera and some software to do the checking. Mm-hmm. It has to be somewhere, physically somewhere. Mm-hmm. There's camera. You can virtualize the camera and do it remotely, but that's incredibly risky when you're trusting the human detection to some remote video feed.
Right.
So that's why we do stuff right in the hardware with the cameras and the software.
And Andrew mentioned this, and like 3 things that the audience can take away, right? First is there's a fantastic white paper on first-person credentials, and really understanding the core. It's not a very technical paper. I think everybody here can certainly read through it and understand. Then the second is the concept of personhood credentials, right? Understanding what personhood credentials are, and then topics like verifiable credentials, but also like understanding proof of authority, which goes back to in the Linux kernel you have authority to send a commit and put a PR, accept a PR. But how do you do proof of authority in this digital world when it is a person? You can prove that a human is a human, but then how do you send your agents out with proof of authority to do things on your behalf? How do you revoke that authority? And you change jobs, you change roles, you just don't want to trust that agent anymore. So those are the kind of things so first-person credentials, proof of personhood, and proof of authority. I think 3 themes that would be really great for everybody
Give
to
Dr. Nicolas a chance. Nah, you talked a long time.
High networks, of course, you've got the attestation, which is signal of proof of documentary of identity as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. So in the end of the day, all these cryptographic techniques and all these protections are absolutely necessary on the back end. And what we need to do on the front end, on the system designer's perspective, is we need to create the user experience and the user interface such that people can actually use those systems. Because in the end of the day, if you have a very sophisticated, foolproof system, but people can't use it, or they lose their keys and they completely get locked out, there's no way to recover, then it becomes not as useful as we wanted it to be. People end up not using it, and people end up falling back into very primitive
What's your password?
What is the last four of your social security types of verification. So yeah, we're big on user experience.
Bit of a disconnect between theory and real-world applications. Yeah. We're going to run out of time, but let's do a quick rapid-fire round. If we are lucky enough to find ourselves back here on the stage all together in 2 years, what progress do you hope the industry has made in terms of proving we're human without doxing ourselves?
I'll start. I will be an AI agent because I'll be not traveling anymore because that will be too expensive. Sorry, were you expecting that?
I wasn't, but I want to be able to make sure that I can prove that the AI agent is actually acting on behalf of you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Distinguish between civil attacks and people being actually able to use agents to empower themselves. So you want your agent to be able to access all these resources online and report to those resources who they represent, so that they can do your work, while at the same time those different services are not bombarded by fake pretending to be human beings.
So I'm going to be a doomsayer.
Love it.
There is going to be a major hack. There is going to be a major leakage of identity. Your grandmother is going to be using an agent, and it's going to be horrible. Just like every other industry, this happens all the time, like the crypto industry as well. And from that, we're going to learn and hopefully build better systems that really secure and provide privacy, privacy-first systems. And I hope that happens fast, because the rate of technology accelerating today is never seen before. I'm grateful for everybody in our community that over the last 10, 15 years has been working on this. And let's make sure that we look at what we've built and use those primitives to build something better.
I really wish it didn't have to be that way, but if we look at history, that is usually how things start to change. Something awful has to happen first. So, I mean, you heard it here, don't say you weren't warned. Thank you for an amazing panel, guys. I look forward to seeing you in 2 years. Find out how it's all going.
Bad moderator. Don't like that.